to the Silent Mystic Contemplative Talk, number 12. Thank you for joining. Here you will find a meditative talk based upon the wisdom that comes through the silence of abiding in God's presence. To prepare for such a talk, it takes a good amount of time of sitting, meditation, contemplation, clearing out the mind and body and spirit in order to be a clear vessel and channel for the spirit. So with this preparation, I come to you today with this message. And I myself, as a person, don't know what the message would be, but I trust that the divine will speak exactly what needs to be spoken, and in turn will be a lesson for all who are listening, including myself, my personhood. God speaks through everyone, whether they realize it or not. In everyone, there's a moment of clarity, a moment of space and stillness, where some inspired thought comes through and is spoken. And when that happens at just the right time, when the person steps aside and allows that divine to move through them and act through them, just trusting that it's the right thing to do, then it can have a profound effect on those around. And sometimes this action or this spoken word coming from the divine in that free flow may not be according to societal rules or regulations or social cues and constructs and patterns that we've learned. So essentially, it takes trust if a message is coming through to allow it to be unobstructed by those learned patterns of the ego, even if those learned patterns seem to be very righteous. Sometimes the divine needs to speak certain things very strongly. And it could be that the polite society doesn't accept those words because it doesn't fit into its neat little construct. The evil of the ego is not so one-dimensional. It actually goes to the subtlest level. We're used to the word evil meaning very grotesque, violent, obviously harmful states of mind. But there are other states, for example, following polite society, following the rules, the social etiquette, trying to keep order, a sense of control, trying to keep everyone in that order and sense of control. And it might seem that everyone is polite and getting along very well, and yet they are restrained. The divine is actually not moving through, it is being suppressed. So, in this sense, the ego has many subtle layers to it. The more gross level of the ego is explicitly violent, but there are, you could say, the higher dimensions or the higher levels where things become more and more subtle. And it takes great discernment to be able to see what is actually the right action here. What is actually the right speech here? Sometimes it may very well be appropriate to follow a behavior or action that is deemed polite or quiet, subdued, calm, peaceful. And other times, the divine actually requires something more forceful and strong. So, the enlightened state of mind, as it moves through this world, does not always look the same. It's not a two-dimensional character. If you look at these figures in the dream, such as Buddha or Jesus, Krishna, they all move through the world, but not in a passive, two-dimensional way. They don't always look the same. In fact, they're very dynamic. There are many sides to them. They are multi-dimensional beings. That is how the divine is, because the divine can be very quiet and still, more still than anything in this world, more peaceful than anything that one can understand. And at the same time, they can be tremendously forceful and courageous and willing to fight for the truth. But it's important to know what the divine is guiding at what times. In the world of duality, the world of the ego, things are classified as good and bad. If you are quiet, peaceful, kind, and so on, that is good. If you are loud and so on, aggressive, violent, that is bad. And each has its consequences. Of course, in different contexts, the ego has different social cues about what it deems appropriate. But the divine, its guidance doesn't come from a set of rules to refer to all the time. This is why the divine doesn't live in dead stone or books. If one is overly reliant on scriptures as a kind of rule book, then it's not going to work, because the divine is dynamic and flexible and meets life in the moment. To plan ahead with rules and regulations is actually a defense against the truth. This is what is taught in the mystical teachings of A Course in Miracles, when you overly try to control time, organizing the present based on past rules, rules for the future, you are actually not trusting the divine in the moment. What is called for in this moment? That is a radical shift from following organized rules. Where am I to go today? Where am I guided to go today in this moment? Now, this may be confused with the dysfunctional side of the ego, the openly dysfunctional side, which is very impulsive and brash. And it is for this reason that those rules were made up in the first place. Because the ego, the spoiled child, the prodigal son that ran away from its source, ran away from its father in heaven, is out of control in its trauma of separation, is out of control. What does this mean, out of control? It is traumatized, and so it is doing all sorts of things in that state of trauma, impulsive things. But that's not the same as following divine guidance in the moment. Although it appears to look impulsive to do so, to follow divine guidance in this moment. But it's done consciously. And when it's done with awareness, one prays to the divine, one is connected, one is present, truly present, then that is not impulsive action. That is actually divinely inspired action. This is the difference. The ego's impulsiveness is not conscious. It's utterly unconscious. It's doing it out of pain. And oftentimes these actions come from addictive patterns. You will find that these impulsive actions are being done over and over again. That's one way to know that this is coming from the ego. For example, if one feels this strong urge to drive really fast when they're angry, when they're frustrated, turning up the music in the car all the way, driving in a way that's dangerous, putting others at danger around them. This is not divinely inspired action in the moment because it is a reaction to some sort of trauma or pain inside. And typically, such an action would be destructive to those around them. But divinely inspired action is actually helpful to everyone around them. Even if it seems to break the mold of those precepts and commandments and rules of morality that were set up. When it is done consciously, it is being done for a purpose. sometimes even a death, is part of the divine plan. Rules were made up in religion to bring the ego mind into some sort of control. Because at a certain stage, that is necessary. At the beginning stages of the spiritual journey, as one's life is falling apart, the ego thrashes about, and it is truly harmful to itself. As a person, harmful to the person and persons around it. So the initial stages of the spiritual path involve some form of control. In order to discipline this spoiled child that is running around, the prodigal son that ran away from home and doesn't know what to do with himself, indulging in this and that distraction of the world, doesn't know what is best for himself. In fact, he just wants to destroy himself and everything around him. For this reason, discipline is necessary, and there are certain control structures that have been developed through religion. Religion, the purpose of it is to remember. There are commandments and rules and precepts to follow. It all helps with disciplining this wayward child that has run away from home. And discipline isn't about punishment, it's actually done in love. You could say the source or the father of this prodigal son is lovingly calling its child back into its arms, but the child is so lost that it needs some form of guidance, some program to follow, some way to be trained in order to come back to sanity, because in its initial state, it is truly insane. For this, the control structures have been created. There were techniques to follow in meditation, for example. There are techniques such as following your breath, using your attention to scan the body, observing. All these things are useful for a time. And then at some point, one starts to feel settled and starts to feel the benefit of this discipline. The mind has come into some sort of hold, the way one would train a wild horse, putting on a harness and leading it back to its stable, its home, wherever it belongs. as the mind starts to feel more settled, realizing the truth, it's actually able to pay attention after some time following these disciplines. It starts to see the fruit of those disciplines. Patience, focus, even compassion and empathy for others, being able to observe the world around, perhaps for the first time, where one was going in the fast lane for so long. The mind has finally been trained to slow down and observe what is going on. What is this world? It's actually able to contemplate this. One without such discipline will always be running from one thing to the next, and will never be able to truly learn the truth because the mind is so agitated and it needs to be disciplined in order to come back to the stillness, or what the ego would call the void. Control and discipline is necessary in the beginning, and at different points throughout the journey. It may be useful, it may be guided to come back to those control structures, some sort of structure that will help to discipline oneself. It's not bad to have a routine. It's not bad to have a discipline. A combination of a control structure and divine guidance in this moment is important. It's important to know after a certain point, after one has calmed down from the rat race and the running and the flailing, the impulsivity, destructiveness, after one has been disciplined to a certain extent, they can begin to look deeper. As the lake becomes more still, the ripples settle down, and one can see a clear reflection of the truth. At this stage, one can let go of such disciplines. Of course, coming back to them whenever it is necessary. A discipline such as fasting can always be helpful to realigning the mind and the body and spirit whenever it comes out of alignment. This is a dual process: discipline and divine guidance. And they work together. If one is only ever following divine guidance, this is possible only at the enlightened stage. Prior to that, you wouldn't know if you are truly following divine guidance or not. It takes discipline to come back into the heart to connect with the divine. So discipline helps to realign you with the divine guidance so that you can follow the right action. They work hand in hand. It may be necessary after a point to let go of meditation techniques, the control structures. After a point, holding on to those structures could be unhelpful and stalling in one's progress. Holding on to old tools that have long served their purpose but are now meant to be let go of. But at some points, they may be useful to return back to, such as following the breath. When the mind is especially agitated, when it is thrown back into a previous unconscious state of mind, then it could be helpful to come back to a discipline. When one feels chaotic, dysfunctional, addicted, out of control, it is useful to go back to a discipline. When your mind feels unsettled, when your life feels chaotic, it can be very useful to come back into alignment by going to a meditation retreat that has lots of rules. Discipline brings you back. But you are not meant to stay there rigidly forever. The spiritual path is a divine dance between this discipline and inspired action. Know when is appropriate for what time. And you will know this by experience only. You won't know this in a book, because anything that you read or anything that you hear outside is not ultimately an alive teaching. It may be that God speaks in the moment to you through someone, and that could be your guidance. This requires a paying attention, and the further you go on the path, the more you will need to be able to discern in the moment what is right. Do you need discipline in this moment? And it's all based on how you are feeling in this moment. How am I feeling in this moment? Am I feeling settled? Am I feeling centered, peaceful, and settled? If that's the case, then it's not the time to practice more discipline necessarily. It could be, but not necessarily. When you are settled, it may be time, a right state of mind, to take some sort of action, inspired action. It may, of course, be a time to rest in that state. So just feel into what the guidance seems to be telling you. Perhaps it's a good time to call someone. You are in a good space, so it's time to share something. How are you feeling in this moment? If you're feeling stressed, anxious, fearful, chaotic, that is not the right time to take any sort of action. In fact, that is a good indicator that the mind needs discipline. There may be some sort of prescriptive technique, action, reading that can be taken at that point. There are many things that one can use in their toolbox. You might do a breathing exercise and then sit for an hour, clearing the mind, coming back to center. The goal is always to come back to center, because the prodigal son has left his source. You, as the child of that source, of God, must come back to center. When you are feeling chaotic, anxious, fearful, it is a sign that something is out of balance. Something has brought you out of balance. So you need to be brought back to the source, to center. And that would not be a good time to take action in order to alleviate those symptoms. Some disciplines that you can use during this time. And these could be things like self-care. Discipline doesn't have to be some harsh thing, because discipline is not punishment. Discipline is love. Discipline comes from self-love and compassion. This could be perhaps going to therapy, seeking counseling session, talking to someone, a trusted friend that you can have a healing conversation with. It could be practicing yoga, asanas, breathing exercises, sitting in silence for an hour. It could be cleaning your house. It could be cooking a meal. It could be getting some errands done. It could be praying. It could be reading something wise, any form of wisdom that will help you. It could be taking a walk in silence for half an hour. It could be journaling for half an hour. Writing down your thoughts, pouring out your emotions until the mind feels settled once again. For it is only your thoughts, only your mind that is creating these tornadoes. What is actually wrong in this moment? Nothing is wrong. Everything is perfect as it is. It is only a matter of bringing your mind back to center, back to this present moment. And once you have done that, once you have been able to settle yourself through these disciplined actions, then you can see what is inspired for you to do. What does the divine call you to do in this moment? So, discipline and control combined with inspiration and freedom make up the steps on the spiritual path. And the mind weaves in and out of these things fluidly. It may not be cut and dry, one or the other. There aren't necessarily hard and fast rules on this path. One can awaken in an instant, and nobody knows why. People can try to explain that this person has done a lot of spiritual work in their past life and their mind is ripe for awakening, and it just took one push. That may be true, but nobody knows. Awakening is a mystery. Ultimately, whatever I have spoken, it comes from my personal experience. And it's common to many of those who walk this path with me. At the same time, there may be an experience that is unlike any of these, where awakening happens in an instant, that holy instant that one is brought straight to God. It may be through a terminal illness. It may be through someone sitting in prison. It may be even through death, being on one's deathbed. It may be through watching a movie. It may be in an instant watching an animal. Anything can be designed to awaken you. Ultimately, it is only the grace of your holy self, the grace of God, that knows the way. And that way is much higher than our ways. That way is a mystery. This life is not revealed to us until we live it as each page in the book of our earthly life. And there are twists and turns, and there are not necessarily prescriptions on how to deal with those. You may have many things in your toolbox. And what works at one point for one situation might not work the second time for the same situation. Because each moment, this moment, is unique and special to the divine. There is only this moment. Only the divine knows how to awaken us. There may be paths, there may be previously defined religions, and so on. But everyone has their own unique path, their own unique religion, you could say, a way of remembering God that doesn't involve anything that this world has taught. Each person's religion is actually unique. There are as many religions and paths as there are people and beings, and every being must awaken. This is how vast and infinite the divine is. One cannot imagine the scale, how many paths there must be. It's the human ego's tendency to fit, like a stencil, a religion, a set of rules, a path onto people. And yet that path is unique to everyone. And it would be a disservice if one was stuck in a stencil of a spiritual path, living it in a kind of two-dimensional way. What was meant for someone else. You cannot awaken on borrowed knowledge. What was true for someone else is not true for you. You must awaken. For it is only your experience that matters. I trust that this message will be received and will be helpful to whoever hears it. Thank you for listening.